Conceived and developed by Careersoft, known as Team Career back then, Langrisser is one of the most historically important strategy RPG series of all time. Most people, of course, don't know that. Probably because most of the games were never released outside of Japan. We only got the first one, and the idiot publisher changed the name of it to War Song, released on the Sega Genesis. So we have one game poorly advertised with a different name and on a platform not really known for its JRPGs outside of Japan. Great. So naturally, it was a commercial failure and nobody ever bothered bringing its 4 sequels. We wouldn't hear of this franchise again until the 3DS with Langrisser Reincarnation Tensei, not by Careersoft. This was an extremely mediocre and forgettable game, so once again, no one gave a damn. Finally, Kadokawa Games, the owners of the rights to these games, decided to remake the first 2 entries in the collection I'll be reviewing today. They still stand as hidden gems, but the reception was mostly positive this time around and brought the series to a slightly bigger audience. You'd be surprised to know that the abominable Nis America translated them, and despite lots of dialogue alterations, no political trash was inserted. In fact, the glorious fan service the games were known for was left completely and surprisingly intact. Of course, the developer did offer some new art style for the characters, which in my opinion turned out to be a mixed bag. I say stick to the original art by Satoshi Urushihara, which is brimming with personality and charisma, and of course, sexier. Going back to the games, the first one follows the Baltia nation being invaded by the Dulcis Empire. Prince Garrett is asked to flee by the king, and so he does in order to seek allies and gather reinforcements to come back and recover the castle. But fate and strange forces decide to intervene, and he ends up in a quest to find the legendary sword Langrisser. Now, the story is good and everything, but the game has several routes and endings. As a player, you can have Garrett make decisions that'll affect the events until slowly moving towards a light or dark path. The writer, Yo Haduki, worked tirelessly to create a more compelling variety of routes and endings, as opposed to having a rich, linear story with tons of dialogue. So he decided to balance things out and let the lore develop itself through the many different paths. Obviously, you'll get different party members depending on these choices, and therefore the paths you take. This was also implemented the exact same way in the original Sega Genesis release and also in the sequel. In terms of gameplay, Langrisser was one of the first JRPGs of its kind to implement a mechanic inspired by Fire Emblem and the old Koei strategy games, so there is no exploration or anything of the sort here. Instead, you are welcomed by a menu before watching several scenes and completing a map. You can check the stats, the equipment, the commanders, etc. And then, once you deploy, you'll start in this menu where you can hire soldiers or mercenaries for money to fight alongside your main characters here. They will always be the commanders, and if they get defeated, all soldiers you recruited for them will disappear. The game has a class system in which every character, after gaining enough levels, can eventually class up to something better or something slightly different. All this without resetting experience and stats, unlike a job system where you kinda go through a fresh start. As a result of this class system, characters can only recruit certain types of units at the beginning that are similar to their class to fight along, but eventually all of them will be able to recruit all types of units, as you can see right here. The money you need to hire them is one after every map, but it's also the one you use to buy equipment, so you'll always have to decide which to prioritize or how to make the best out of the amount you'll have at the beginning of each mission. Anyway, in the options menu of the remakes, you can change between the original music or the rearrangements, but you can also change between the original Satoshi Urushihara art style or the new one, but also between the new in-game graphics or the originals. Nothing, however, can be done about the super generic low-budget, almost mobile phone game-looking chibi models for your characters and enemies. It's honestly my one and only big complaint with this game, that everything looks awesome except for its in-game graphics. But what do you expect from a low-budget remake of 2 games that were never mainstream to begin with? Once a map starts, you'll have a player phase and an enemy phase. During the player phase, you can move all of your characters on a grid-based system. If you end your phase, you can have all of your units, non-commanders, move by themselves, but I recommend only using this for the hired units and only sometimes to make things faster. Same with the fast forward feature. Once an attack is selected, this 2 battle screen will show up to see the RNG doing its dirty work. So you have to consider 2 things here, other than some terrain advantage here and there. First, there's a triangle class system. Some classes are strong to some and weak to others. You will also get to a point where certain classes can recruit monsters that, strangely, also fall under the same triangle class system. And second, only a healer commander can utilize healing magic, so try to often keep her on a safe distance. But if your units didn't attack anyone during the player phase, you can move them right next to the commander so they can heal a bit at the end of the enemy turn. And also, if they're too far away from the commander when they're trying to attack or being attacked, keep in mind their stats will be greatly reduced the farther they are. Now, units don't level up. If they defeat an enemy, your commander will get the experience and level up, because these units will be gone at the end of the battle and won't come back at all. But like I said before, you can rehire new ones at the beginning of the next map. Also, there is no permadeath in either remake, as opposed to the original Genesis versions, which did have. If a commander dies here, he or she will simply retreat, but if the main character dies, in this case Garrett, it's game over. Yup, it's one of those games. So overall, the combat is great, especially with the fast-forward additions and the skippable animations. The music is absolutely incredible, mainly composed by legendary Noriyuki Iwadare. It was phenomenal, catchy, sounding very exciting in the original, and the rearrangements for the remix were just as badass, with the same heavy metal tunes returning with real instruments. These two remakes honestly have some of the best soundtracks in the entire history of JRPGs. The game is quite challenging despite having difficulty settings for the remake. I suggest you beat the game on normal and stick to one route so you can start a new game plus, over-leveled, and go through the rest of the routes and endings with the help of a guide and, well, this chart. That's right, here you can just jump back to decision points throughout the story so you won't have to restart the game every time you want to attempt a new route. But once you go back, you won't be able to teleport back to the future or something, keep that in mind. It's really helpful, making the game flow feel quite addicting, because honestly the routes and endings are the magic of both games, considering only one route takes about 10 hours or so to complete. Langrisser 2 takes place several years after the first one, now under the dominance of the Rhaegar Empire. Those idiots have made a pact with the bad guy from the first game, Lord Bowser, which means his counterpart Jessica will return here once again. The main plot follows a new hero though, Elwyn here, and a brand new cast of characters. So I wouldn't say it's indispensable to play the first game first, but why would you if you're probably gonna play these two remakes and they come in the same release? A few things stand out in this sequel though. The story is more fleshed out, not just in terms of dialogue, but also in character development. The first one barely had any unless you did most routes and endings. This one offers you a richer narrative for both lore and characters regardless of the route, which makes it a longer game with way more routes and endings than its predecessor. But also, coincidentally, it's a bit more challenging but also more balanced. Now, in terms of gameplay, combat and graphics, the game is identical to the first one, no significant differences exist, in fact barely anything worth mentioning. You still have the same menu system to hire soldiers or mercenaries, you still have a class system for every character, you still have the grid-based maps with the same generic graphics, both new and old switchable art styles, etc. Again, no permadeath, where if the protagonist dies, it's game over. One thing I didn't mention before is that characters will learn a wide variety of magic spells. Eventually, some of them will also be able to use healing magic, but if any of your commanders use one magic spell, it'll end their turn, even if it's just healing or a simple buff. Another thing to notice is that you don't have to kill all enemy units if you don't want to, you can just go straight for the enemy commander and their soldiers will disappear. But if you want more experience, try to kill all of them. The equipment system is also the same here, where characters can equip one weapon, one armor, and one accessory. It's important to know that a few of them have some penalties, but anyone can equip mostly anything. The class system is the same like I mentioned, with branching points as you level up, using CP points to unlock each new class. More variety in mission objectives though. In fact, both games had that characteristic where it wasn't always just kill all enemies or kill the enemy commander, even though most missions still fall under that. I feel because of this, the length, the more fleshed out story, the amount of both old and new routes and endings, and the more difficult but also more balanced challenge, Langrisser 2 is definitely the better game, but they both play identical. However, the music is a bit different, it's got a plethora of badass heavy metal themes, but also some blues and jazz included this time around. It's a phenomenal soundtrack as well. So overall, these two games are highly recommended, and if you're into strategy JRPGs, they are absolutely a must play.